Good morning, Darnell.
Good morning.
Are you a little nervous up there?
Yes.
It's understandable. I'm just going to take a few minutes this morning to talk with you and give the jury a chance to hear from you about what you saw, how you reacted, and what happened on May 25th. Okay?
Yes.
First of all, Darnella, would you tell us how old you are?
I'm 18 years old.
And 1 week ago, were you 18 years old?
No.
So you just had a birthday.
Yes.
And so when we talk about May 25th of last year, you were?
17.
Are you a student?
Yes.
Tell us, where do you go to? Are you in high school?
Yes.
Where do you go to high school?
9th through 11th, I went to Roosevelt High School. Then made the decision to switch to Augsburg Fairview Academy for my 12th grade year.
Okay. So you most certainly remember the date of May 25th of last year.
Yes.
I want to take you to a certain time period on May 25th at around 7 o'clock p.m. on May 25th. Do you recall walking to Cup Foods?
Yes.
And were you by yourself?
No.
Were you walking with a cousin of yours?
Yes.
Do you recall how old your cousin was?
Maybe 12. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Maybe not.
Maybe.
Now you're walking to Cup Foods. Where were you walking from?
Home.
So you live nearby.
Yes.
Would you describe Cup Foods as the neighborhood store?
Yes.
Now the jury may have heard something about this being a dangerous neighborhood. Were you concerned for your safety in walking with your cousin to Cup Foods?
No.
If you had to estimate, how many times would you say you walked to Cup Foods from your home in the neighborhood?
Hundreds, so maybe even thousands.
So you and your cousin walk into Cup Foods. What were you going there for? Do you remember?
I was taking her to get some snacks.
Your cousin loves snacks.
Yes.
So let's go to May 25th of 2020, and I want to show you a couple of things just to set the scene for our discussion. I want to show you what's been marked for identification purposes, for our purposes, as Exhibit 13. Your Honor, I think I need a handler. Okay, I got one. Now, in Exhibit 13, do you see two people in that, in what is a photograph?
Yes, but I also see two people back there, if that
I see.
counts.
Right, you see two people in the front of the photo and two people in the back.
Yes.
Is this photo a true and accurate depiction of you and your cousin in the
Yes.
front of the photograph on May 25th?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'll offer Exhibit 13 into evidence.
No objection, Your Honor.
13 is received. Would you like me to publish?
Yes, Your Honor, thank you. All right, now the jury can see it too. Now this is a screen that you can actually mark on. And so if we see the two people that are right here in the front of this picture, there's a little girl with the word love on her sweatshirt, and there's another person next to her. One of those persons you?
Yes.
And which one, the bigger one or the little one?
The bigger one.
And this is your cousin next to you.
Yes.
And is this as you walk into to Cup Foods?
Yes.
I want to show you what we've marked as Exhibit 16 for the trial. If you could pull that up, Brad. Now, is this a video that you've seen before?
Yes.
Do you have personal knowledge of the scene that's depicted in this exhibit?
Yes.
Is this video a true and accurate depiction of the scene as you saw it on May 25th of 2020?
Yes.
Your Honor, the state offers Exhibit 16 in now.
Any objection? 16 is received.
So, Mr. Eltiste, if you could play this a little ways, I want to ask you some questions about it. So we can see with the jury, two people walking from the left to the right. There's a little girl in a green shirt, and there you are. Do you see you?
Yes.
And is this as you all were approaching Cup Foods on May 25th?
Yes.
Now, see there, your cousin goes into the store. Why did she go into the store and then you turned around and then came back toward the squad cars?
I wanted to make sure she got in.
You stop there, Brad, for a second. When you walked past the squad car there, did you see anything happening there on the ground as you were walking towards Cup Foods with your cousin?
Yes. I see a man on the ground and I see a cop kneeling down on him.
Was there anything about the scene that you didn't want your cousin to see?
Yes.
And what was that?
A man terrified, scared, begging for his life.
Is that why you directed your cousin to going into Cup Foods?
Yes.
And then when you saw what was happening there at the scene, what was it about the scene that caused you to come back?
It wasn't right. He was suffering. He was in pain.
Let me stop you there for just a second, Darnell. And so when you say, first of all, he, are you referring to the person you come to know as George Floyd?
Yes.
Did you know anything about Mr. George Floyd before May 25th?
No.
Had you ever met him before?
No.
Ever seen him before to your knowledge?
No.
So when you came back to this scene here that we can see in Exhibit 16, what did you do when you first got there and we see where you're standing? What did you do?
I pulled out my phone,
And what were you doing to pull out your phone?
recording, capturing what I was seeing.
And we have already admitted into evidence in this case the video which you had done, which was our Exhibit 15 that's in evidence. So tell the jury what you observed, what you heard when you stopped to look at what was happening there at the scene.
I heard George Floyd saying, I can't breathe, please get off of me. I can't breathe. He cried for his mom. He was in pain. It seemed like he knew. It seemed like he knew it was over for him. He was terrified. He was suffering. This was a cry for help. Definitely.
Yeah. You'll disregard any opinions about how Mr. Floyd was feeling, but you can rely on her observations. To the extent that you appropriate. Mr. Blackwell.
Thank you, Your Honor. Donna, let me show you for a moment. We'll come back to this discussion. Let me show you Exhibit 17. That's also already in evidence. 8. So can you see the person depicted on Exhibit 17? Darnella, are you able to tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury if you know who this man is? You can take your time.
Yes.
Please tell the ladies and gentlemen, who is this?
This was the officer that was kneeling on George Floyd's neck.
On May 25th.
Yes.
Is this the way he appeared when you saw him on May 25th, kneeling on George Floyd's neck?
Yes.
When you first arrived at the scene, you can take that now, Brett. When you first arrived at the scene and you started recording with your phone camera, were there other bystanders or others there present at the time?
No.
About how long before other people started to gather with you?
Not even a minute in.
And could you estimate roughly how many others were just there around you who were also observing what was happening?
Maybe about 12, 14, something around that maybe.
If I showed you a picture of those who were there, might you recognize those who might have been present with you? Let's see. Brady pulled Exhibit 184.
For the record, that's not been
Thank
His name is to refresh memory, is that correct?
you. Yes, John, just one moment. Let me make sure it's just that only that she can see.
I've already got it.
All right, thank you, Judge. As you look at Exhibit 184, do these look like in this exhibit the other bystanders who were with you at the scene on May 25th?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'll offer 184 now.
Any objection?
no objection, Your Honor.
184 as we see.
So looking at this picture, photograph at 184, can you identify for us any of the other bystanders? We know that you identify your cousin to the right. How about any of the people, others here in the photograph?
This is a former friend. This is a friend I went to school with, Alyssa.
Would you just point her out so that you can mark on the screen actually?
Right there.
I'm sorry.
The arrow was on.
I'm sorry, Judge. Could you repeat that?
The arrow is on the screen.
The arrow's on
Where
the
she
screen.
pointed.
Yeah, just one moment. Is she able to mark from where she is?
She did. She put the arrow. She put the arrow on the screen to
Okay.
mark where her friend is. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
You see the arrow, Mr. Blackwell?
Yeah, no, I can't see anything on the screen here at all. Yeah, all right. You mentioned there's another one of your friends in the picture,
Yes.
and what was the friend's name?
Alyssa.
And could you again point out Alyssa? Okay, now I see it. Thank you, Alan. And what about any other persons you know here?
Not on the scene, but I do know people that was there at the last minute. I know some of the workers because I've lived there for a while.
But you were there the whole time as these various group of bystanders gathered together on May 25th.
Yes.
If somebody were to tell the ladies and gentlemen of this jury that you and the rest of the bystanders who were there were an unruly crowd or mob, I didn't finish the question yet. Hypothetical.
I don't think it can be non-leading. So let's rephrase as a non-leading question, please.
All right. I want you to describe the nature and character of the persons gathered together there. Would you describe yourselves as an unruly mob or an unruly crowd?
Sustain. Now, overruled. I think it's the only way to get an answer. However, I would like to sidebar after this answer. Go ahead.
No, I would say everyone were reacting multiple different ways from what they were seeing, which it wasn't right. We all know it wasn't right.
The last part of the answer is stricken. I'd like a sidebar with counsel.
Yes, sir.
All right. Sorry, the technical difficulties are sending shooting pains in all of our ears.
Yes.
Mr. Blackwell, if you would.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you. So as you were there with the other bystanders, did any of these bystanders ever threaten the police?
No.
Did any of them ever physically get violent with the police?
No.
Did you at the scene on May 25th see any violence at the scene at all anywhere?
Yes, from the cops, from Chauvin, and from Officer Tao. I think that's his name.
Other than the violence you saw from Mr. Chauvin and the other police, did you see any act of violence from the bystanders who were there?
No.
Did you see any of the bystanders that act in any way that you would describe as unruly?
No.
Do you think it's fair to call them a mob?
No.
Amongst the bystanders who were there, did you see any of them make an effort to actually offer care for Mr. Floyd?
Physically?
Yes.
I heard them say, "Get off of him. You're hurting him. He can't breathe. He's not moving." But anytime someone tried to get close, they were defensive, so we couldn't even get close.
So first, let's just stick with what you heard the bystanders. The bystanders were saying things to Mr. Chauvin.
Yes.
What things did you hear that were being said to Mr. Chauvin by the bystanders?
You're hurting him. Are you enjoying this? He can't breathe. He's not moving. His nose is bleeding. You're a bum. Pretty much words around that category.
And when you arrived at the scene, can you describe for us, first of all, what was the position of Mr. Floyd when you arrived at this scene and saw him by the squad car?
He was laid down on the ground, restrained. It didn't look like he could move much, but his head.
And by restrained, was he in handcuffs?
Yes.
By restrained, where was Mr. Chauvin in relation to Mr. Floyd?
His knee was kneeling on his neck. It was two other officers holding him down as well.
And what did you hear or see Mr. Floyd doing while he was being restrained underneath, as you described, the knee of Mr. Chauvin?
He was complaining about, he was stating that he was in pain. He said his neck, his back, everything hurts. I can't breathe. Mom, he said, I would get up if I could. Something around that. I wouldn't say that's his exact words. But yeah, pretty much he was saying how much in pain he was. He couldn't breathe.
At some point, was there a person who came to the scene who identified herself as a firefighter?
Yes.
Are you able to see her in this exhibit 184?
Yes.
Could you point to her? Okay, and let the record reflect she's pointed to Genevieve Hanson.
Objective as far as the name. She's identified who she believes is the firefighter.
She hasn't testified yet. So.
The record will reflect that the witness has identified the person dressed in black, holding up a phone with a white headband in Exhibit 184.
When this person who identified herself as a firefighter came, what did she do?
She asked them to check his pulse.
Who did she ask to check?
Chauvin.
And she asked Officer Chauvin to check the pulse of Mr. Floyd.
Yes.
Then what happened?
He remained kneeling on his neck. And she asked multiple times, not just once.
Then what did she do? Did she try to check his pulse?
No, they wouldn't even let us get close.
And what prevented your getting close when you say they wouldn't let us get close?
they were quick to pull out mace.
Who pulled out mace?
Officer Tao and Chauvin. He put his hand on his mace. They put their hand on their mace. I can't remember if they actually pointed at us, but they definitely put their hand on the mace, and we all back.
Did you feel threatened by the police officers?
Yes,
Did you feel threatened by Mr. Shop?
yes.
Why is that?
He seemed like, how do I word this? I felt like I was in danger when he did that. It rubbed me the wrong way. I didn't understand why they would do that. What we did for them to make them do that. That's why I felt threatened. I don't understand why the mace was even needed at all.
So as you were observing Mr. Floyd under the knee of Mr. Chauvin, did you ever see Mr. Chauvin do anything to offer care to Mr. Floyd?
No,
Did he ever either let up or get up so that he could breathe?
no,
Did you ever see him try to administer CPR?
no,
Did you see him call anyone else to administer aid to Mr. Floyd?
no,
Did he call out and ask if anybody amongst the bystanders knew CPR who might be able to help him?
not at all.
At what point did you see? Well, let me ask this: did an ambulance at some point arrive at the scene,
Yes,
and you saw the ambulance arrive there?
yes.
Roughly, how many minutes after you first started watching what was happening to Mr. Floyd did the ambulance show up?
The end of my video, the video was about 10 minutes. I would say maybe somewhere around 9. I'm not sure.
So, was there any point in your video, whether it's 9 or 10 minutes, that Mr. Chauvin ever let up or got up off of the neck of Mr. Floyd that you saw?
No, if anything, he actually was kneeling harder. It looked like he was shoving his knee in his neck. Like he was, yeah.
So was it your experience then, as the bystanders cried out, that Mr. Chauvin kneeled in even harder? Is that what you're saying?
Can you rephrase that?
You told us that it looked like Mr. Chauvin was kneeling in even harder on
Yes.
Mr. Floyd. Was there anything that was in response to that he was kneeling harder?
I feel like he was feeding off of our energy.
Calls for speculation.
I want to know.
Counsel, should we take our morning break at this time?
Yes, sir.
All right. Members of the jury, we're going to break until 11:15. We're in recess. Members of the jury, we sorry for the little bit of a delay. We had a legal issue that we had to deal with, and also we think we fixed this so that we're not going to blow our ears out next time. Let's hope. Mr. Blackwell, if you would.
Thank you, Ron. Donnell, before the break, let me just bring you back to where we were. You had given us testimony to the fact that you saw from time to time Mr. Chauvin kneel harder.
Yes.
You remember that testimony?
Yes.
Could you tell the ladies and jury, members of the jury, how did you see him respond and react to the crowds calling out to him? What did you see him do?
He just stared at us, looked at us. He had like this cold look, heartless. He didn't care. It seemed as if he didn't care what we were saying. It didn't change anything he was doing.
In response to what you and the other bystanders were saying, did you see him do anything differently to the body of George Floyd?
Can you
Well, I'll just ask you the question. Yes. In response to what the crowd was doing or saying, did you see him at any time kneel in harder on George Floyd in response?
Yes.
Incidentally, do you see Mr. Chauvin in the courtroom
Yes.
today? Could you please point him out?
Right there.
Yep, for the record, she's pointed to Mr. Chauvin. Thank you. Now, you had at some point told us that you were there when the ambulance came.
Yes.
Did Mr. Chauvin get off of Mr. Floyd when the ambulance arrived?
No, the ambulance person had to actually tell him to lift up.
So the ambulance arrives, and does an ambulance person get out right away and come over to ask Mr. Chauvin to lift up, or did something else happen before that?
He checked his pulse first while Chauvin's knee was still remained on George Floyd's neck.
All right, so paramedic checks his pulse with Mr. Chauvin still on his neck. Then what happened after that?
The paramedic he did like a motion, like get up, basically telling him to remove his knee. His knee was still there, even when they came, even at the end, even unresponsive.
Right. And did Mr. Chauvin get up at that time then?
Yes.
Right. As you were observing the entire scene, did you observe Mr. Floyd do anything that you felt was threatening to any of the police officers?
No.
Did you see him do anything other than call out in anguish?
No, besides maybe trying to get more comfortable. No.
Do you feel, well, let me ask the question a different way. When you arrived at the scene, you heard Mr. Floyd crying out, you told us.
Yes, from afar.
At some point during the period of time when he was under Mr. Chauvin's knees, did you see him go unconscious?
Yes.
Did you hear any discussion about whether or not he had in fact died?
No.
Did you have, when the paramedics came, they picked up his body, they took his body from the scene?
Yes.
Did they revive him there?
No.
Did you ever see him conscious again when he left the scene, before he left the scene?
No.
Incidentally, with the photograph here of the bystanders, the exhibit 184 that's in front of you, did the bystanders for the most part stay there on the sidewalk where they were?
For the most part, yes.
If they stepped at all into the street, was there an officer there telling them to get back?
Yes.
Did you see that the bystanders complied with what the officer was asking to get back?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'll pass the witness.
Ms. Mills.
Thank you. Good morning, ma'am.
Well,
Thank you for being here. Just have a few questions for you, okay?
okay.
You testified that when you first came up to Cup Foods, you initially heard what was being said by Mr. Floyd, right?
Yes.
And you sent your cousin into the store, and you never went into Cup Foods yourself, right?
Correct.
You turned around, and you pretty much right away from the time you sent your cousin into the store, right away started recording, right?
Correct.
And ultimately, you recorded from that point all the way until shortly after the paramedics came and left, right?
Correct.
All right. And so it's fair to say that prior to, well, as you approached them, Mr. Floyd was already in that position, right?
Yes.
He was on the ground.
Yes.
And anything that happened prior to that, you wouldn't be privy to or know what happened, right?
Correct.
But you, and so what we saw from your video that has been played was roughly 10 minutes of time, agreed?
Agree.
And throughout the course of your time that you were recording, you would agree that when we watch the video, there are times we can hear your voice, right?
Correct.
And we can hear the voices of the other people, the bystanders, so to speak, right?
Yes.
And I believe that you said there were about 12, by the end, there were about 12 to 14 people that were standing kind of right there on the sidewalk, right?
Correct.
Were you also observing people across the street?
No.
Were you observing people like down on the other side of 38th?
No. Mainly focused on what I was saying.
Right. You would agree that that intersection is a fairly busy intersection, lots of traffic?
Certain days, yes, it could be.
Yeah. I mean, at times, right?
Yes.
It's a bus route, there's buses coming by.
It's
right?
been multiple times. It's been empty though, as well. But yeah.
Understood, right. It's a busier intersection. It's in the middle of the city, right? It's compared to like in a neighborhood, like where there's all houses. More traffic there, right?
Yes.
And in fact, in your video, we can actually see a lot of cars driving by because this was, a nice spring night, right?
Yes.
And so, your video, in other words, sort of speaks for itself, right? What we see on it is what you were watching as you watched it.
Correct. Correct.
Okay. You were interviewed by, I believe, a couple of Bureau of Criminal Apprehension agents early on in the case, right?
Who?
The BCA, Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. They came and took a statement from you.
Yes.
Okay.
The FBI?
Was there an FBI agent? Let's call them law enforcement, all right? There were a couple of law enforcement agents that interviewed you.
Closer to the situation, yes. It was I believe two white guys. I'm not sure if they were white, but they looked white. But yes, closer to the situation, yes.
Right. You met with them, you provided them your cell phone, and you
Yes.
allowed them to copy the video from your cell phone for purposes of their investigation, right?
Yes.
And at that time, they took a statement from you. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And you understand that that statement was recorded, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I don't want to misphrase what you said before, but I thought I heard you say that you were aware that there were 4 officers on the scene when you walked up.
No. I didn't see the other officers until the end, and when everything blowed up, I've seen different angles. That's when I figured out it was two other officers on George Floyd when he was laying on the ground.
The question being, though, however, as you were filming it, you were not aware that those other two officers were there.
No, only officer I seen was Chauvin and Officer Tao.
Right. And those are the two that you primarily had interactions with Officer Tao, right?
Yes.
And you testified that Officer Chauvin didn't say very much, right?
Yes.
But it's also fair to say that you couldn't necessarily hear whether those other officers were speaking to Mr. Chauvin.
Objection, Your Honor, is assuming facts that are not established.
Overruled. You can answer if you know. You want me to ask the question again?
I heard him.
Okay.
No, I did not hear the other officers.
Right. And it's also fair to say that when you first started recording, you were one of the few people that were there, right?
I was the first person to record.
Right.
First person. Yeah, sure.
And by the end of the video, there were more people present.
Yes.
And would you agree that initially when you started recording, you weren't saying much, if anything, to the officers, right?
I don't remember.
But as time went on and more people showed up, voices became louder. Would you agree with that?
As we understood more what was happening.
I just want to know.
What we seen
Right,
is how we reacted.
right.
Like you said, the video speaks for itself.
Understood, and I appreciate that. So you heard various people calling the officers names, right?
Yes.
And the volume of the people in that were bystanders grew louder over time. Would you agree with that?
Yes. More so as he was becoming more unresponsive.
And more people also started speaking at the same time, right?
Yes.
So we had, you said there were 12 to 14 people
Around that.
around that number. I think I counted 12 in the picture.
Okay.
And several of them were speaking. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And several of them were yelling.
Yes.
And they were becoming more and more upset based upon what they saw.
Correct.
Do you remember Officer Tao saying to you, if you can breathe if you can talk?
Yes.
Now, in addition to your initial interview with law enforcement officers, you've also met with the prosecution team a couple of times in preparation for trial, right?
Who would that be?
Well, like Mr. Ellison, Mr. Blackwell, Mr. Frank, Mr. Slisher, and a host of others, right?
Correct.
Okay. And you were you grew up in the nearby neighborhood, right?
I'm from here. I grew up near the suburbs.
Okay. But you were at the time living.
At the time, I've been there for years. Yes, correct.
For how many years did you say?
Maybe, I don't know, 5+.
Okay. And you attended Roosevelt High School at the time?
Yes.
And you testified that you felt safe, walking to the store.
Actually, sorry. At the time of this, I'm not sure if I attended Roosevelt because I was in the process of switching schools.
Okay. I think it was during the pandemic, right? And so everybody kind of had, all of a sudden you had to study from home kind of a thing, right?
I was already at my other school.
Okay.
So yes.
You testified that you've walked to Cup Foods hundreds, if not thousands of times,
Correct.
and that you felt safe doing so.
Any time of the night, I would walk there.
Okay. Would you agree that you had previously told members of the prosecution team that at night the neighborhood can be a little bit more dangerous?
Some nights, I mean, wasn't really known for violence like every night or a lot, but I feel like any area has some type of crime
Sure.
from here and there.
Sure, understood. And I'm not trying to disparage the neighborhood, right? I'm just asking what you had told the prosecution before,
Right.
all right? You ultimately ended up posting your video to social media, right?
Correct.
And it went viral.
Correct.
And was that a surprise to you?
Definitely.
Changed your life, right?
Beyond objectives, beyond the scope of the record,
Overruled.
Are you asking me?
Yes, it changed your life.
It has.
Your Honor, I have no further questions for this witness.
Any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Blackwell.
Darnella, you had just been asked questions about the safety of your neighborhood at night. On May 25th, when you were you there at Cup Foods at night?
No.
Sun was out, you could see fine.
Correct.
You were also asked whether or not you were aware of what people were across the street from where the officers were, what people were on the other side of 38th Street. Remember Mr. Nelson asking you about that?
Correct.
Did you see anybody from across the street or from 38th Street do anything to either attack or threaten Mr. Chauvin?
No.
And do you think that if somebody came across the street to attack or threaten Mr. Chauvin, you had your camera going, you'd have recorded it?
Correct.
Now he asked some questions about, again, the bystanders who were there, and he talked with you about that, those bystanders. Did you see a single thing that indicated to you that Mr. Chauvin was afraid of you, your little cousin, or a single one of the bystanders?
No.
You were asked about cars on the street. There are cars and cars and cars going. Did you notice, was Mr. Chauvin trying to get out of the way of cars?
No.
You were also asked about what the officers might have been saying to Mr. Chauvin.
Correct.
Remember talking about that?
Yes.
Did you hear any of the officers tell Mr. Chauvin that Mr. Floyd didn't have a pulse? Did you hear him say that even?
No.
You didn't hear him say anything.
No.
And you were also asked questions about how, as the events went on May 25th, how you and others may have gotten louder.
Correct.
Darnell, are you the sort of person who, in response to seeing somebody being potentially harmed on the street, gets louder?
I'm more of I bottle things up. I feel things inside. I have social anxiety, so it's really out of my comfort zone to really be that out person. But, when I seen what I saw, at moments I was loud.
Loud in response to what you saw.
Correct.
Now, Mr. Nelson asked you a few questions about your video going viral and how that's changed your life. Remember that at the end?
Yes.
Would you tell the ladies and gentlemen how your viewing, experiencing what happened to George Floyd has affected your life?
When I look at George Floyd, I look at my dad, I look at my brothers, I look at my cousins, my uncles, because they are all black. I have a black father. I have a black brother. I have black friends. And I look at that and I look at how that could have been one of them. It's been nights I stayed up apologizing and apologizing to George Floyd for not doing more and not physically interacting and not saving his life. But it's like, it's not what I should have done. It's what he should have done. He
Thank
should
you,
have.
Donna.
That'll finish the answer, thank you.
Okay.
Did you finish your answer, Donnell?
She finished her answer.
Yeah, thank you.
Proceed to your next question.
No, Your Honor, that's my last question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Donnell.
Mr. Nelson. All right, thank you. You may step down.